State of Cannabis.
This is the State of Cannabis News Digest, a roundup of this week's key developments in the cannabis industry.
Our top stories.
From coast to coast, the American cannabis landscape is shifting through legislation, regulation, and growing political friction. Today, we begin in California, where a proposed permanent ban on hemp-derived THC products has reignited debate over consumer safety and market economics. It's a move echoed by regulatory crackdowns and political hesitation in states like Florida, Delaware, Texas, and North Carolina, all confronting the challenge of intoxicating hemp in unregulated or loosely monitored markets. Meanwhile, other states are charting more nuanced courses. Rhode Island has delayed a ban to study safer regulatory pathways. Missouri faces a dramatic ballot showdown that could unify its marijuana and hemp laws under one umbrella. And in New York, cannabis equity programs are expanding even as a product recall puts lab oversight under scrutiny. Worsening. In the Midwest and Northeast, the momentum is building. Minnesota has issued its first adult-use cannabis license. Massachusetts may soon see cannabis cafes, and Maryland has marked Juneteenth with a new wave of pardons tied to cannabis justice. And in Ohio and Pennsylvania, political gridlock and budget deadlines are putting cannabis policy, and the billions in tax revenue it represents, on uncertain footing. All that, plus a closer look at how states are balancing youth safety, economic growth, and equity in a fast-evolving cannabis economy. Stay tuned as we break down each of these stories in full. And now, here is the deeper look at the key events in the cannabis world this week.
California is taking a hard stance on hemp-derived THC products, moving to make its temporary ban permanent. The state's Department of Public Health published the proposed rules on June 14th, opening a 45-day public comment period with a public hearing expected next month. The ban would continue to prohibit any detectable levels of intoxicating THC in consumable hemp products like gummies and beverages. Governor Gavin Newsom, who has long supported cannabis legalization, spearheaded the original emergency measure last fall after discovering intoxicating hemp products sold at a local retailer. The products were often unregulated, untested, and easily accessible, raising safety and market concerns. The administration argues that the ban helps safeguard California's legal cannabis industry, which operates under strict testing and taxation. However, economic estimates predict the permanent rule could cost the state over $600 million and nearly 19,000 jobs in the next 5 years, with multiple businesses expected to close. Whether this ban ultimately boosts California's licensed cannabis sales, already down 11% in Q1, or just reshuffles market dynamics remains to be seen.
In Delaware, a bill that sought to bring regulation to the state's growing market of hemp-derived THC beverages has been withdrawn, at least for now. Representative Deborah Heffernan, who introduced the measure, announced this week that the bill is being tabled until 2026 after weeks of stakeholder feedback and public concern. The original proposal would have restricted sales of THC-infused drinks, often found in convenience stores and hemp shops, to licensed liquor stores. It also proposed a $1 tax per can and included regulations for hemp edibles like gummies and vape oils. After strong opposition, the bill was revised to reduce the tax and remove restrictions on edibles, but concern from both the hemp industry and consumers remained. The bill's aim was to improve safety and create guardrails around products that are currently untested and accessible to minors. Heffernan emphasized that the bill was never intended to ban CBD products or shut down hemp businesses, but instead to start a conversation about regulation in an unregulated market. Delaware's newly appointed marijuana commissioner, Joshua Sanderlin, agreed there's a need to regulate intoxicating hemp products, but said discussions are ongoing about how best to do that. For now, the sale of THC drinks remains legal and unregulated, something both liquor stores and hemp retailers say leaves them in a gray area. While the legislation is off the table for now, Heffernan said she plans to revisit the issue in 2026 after engaging more stakeholders, including Delaware's cannabis oversight agencies, to develop a plan that addresses safety without stifling innovation in the hemp space.
In Florida, new regulations for hemp products officially went into enforcement this week. Under the new rule, retailers and manufacturers must now follow strict guidelines around packaging, labeling, and marketing, including child-resistant packaging, QR-coded lab test links, and bans on cartoon-like images or any materials that might appeal to children. Commissioner of Agriculture Wilton Simpson, who led the effort, said these rules were necessary to protect minors and increase consumer trust in the state's hemp industry. The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services revealed that more than 726,000 hemp products had already been flagged as non-compliant since July 2023. Simpson's office collaborated with lawmakers to shape these changes, which are now being strictly enforced as of June 17th. For businesses, the changes may require overhauls in labeling and packaging practices, but they also provide a clearer regulatory structure that could benefit compliant retailers in the long run.
Want to stay ahead of the smoke in America's evolving cannabis landscape? Subscribe to State of Cannabis Weekly News Digest, your trusted source for fact-checked, nonpartisan cannabis reporting. Each week, we bring you the latest on federal reforms, state laws, industry shifts, and public health developments, all in one digestible episode. Whether you're a policymaker, patient, advocate, or entrepreneur, we've got the information you need to stay informed. Hit follow, give us a like or a thumbs up, drop a review or leave a comment. Share this episode with someone who cares about cannabis reform. Because in this industry, knowledge isn't just power, it's survival.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore marked Juneteenth with a sweeping announcement that blends cannabis justice with economic repair. Speaking at the historic Bethel AME Church in Cambridge, Moore announced the pardon of nearly 7,000 additional cannabis convictions, bringing the total number of marijuana-related offenses he has cleared to over 180,000 since 2024. The latest pardons were necessary due to prior data entry errors that left many convictions out of the first mass clemency order. These cases are now officially cleared, thanks to recent efforts to implement Maryland's Expungement Reform Act.
Nearly 9 years after Massachusetts voters approved recreational cannabis, the state is finally moving toward allowing public consumption. This fall, cannabis cafes and consumption lounges could open across the state, thanks to new regulations being finalized by the Cannabis Control Commission. Acting Chair Bruce Stebbins says the commission will vote on draft rules by the end of July, with a final round of public input to follow. If all goes smoothly, the state expects enforceable social consumption regulations in place by October 2025. The proposed framework includes 3 types of licenses: one for existing cannabis businesses to open consumption areas, another for hospitality businesses like yoga studios or coffee shops, and a third for event organizers who want to host cannabis-friendly festivals and gatherings. Local towns and cities will need to opt in before any of these venues can open. And while the CCC has removed a previously suggested provision for medical marijuana use at these lounges, regulators are aiming for balanced rules that ensure public health, safety, and business viability.
Minnesota's adult-use cannabis market has reached a key milestone. The state's Office of Cannabis Management has issued the first official license to a cannabis microbusiness that will cultivate marijuana outdoors. This marks the beginning of commercial cannabis activity in Minnesota since legalization in 2023. To build momentum, the state is expanding access for others to join the industry. Starting August 1st, applications will open for cannabis testing labs and event organizers. These testing labs are essential for consumer safety, and a recent policy change allows them to be licensed while awaiting formal accreditation. Event licenses will permit the hosting of cannabis-related gatherings, though alcohol will be banned at these events. From July 7th to July 21st, social equity applicants can once again seek verification, with new criteria broadening eligibility. Meanwhile, Minnesota's tribal nations are already leading the way. The White Earth Nation opened the state's first off-reservation recreational cannabis store, with more locations coming soon. Cities like Anoka and St. Joseph are also getting involved by applying to run municipally owned dispensaries.
In Missouri, a major clash is unfolding between the state's marijuana and hemp industries. A coalition led by hemp business American Shaman is preparing a 2026 ballot initiative to replace Missouri's current marijuana laws with a single regulatory framework that would govern all cannabis products, including intoxicating hemp, under rules no stricter than those for alcohol and tobacco. Advocates say the move would create a level playing field, unify the market, and lower barriers for small and legacy operators. They also argue it could increase tax revenues by expanding the legal market. But opponents, led by the Missouri Cannabis Trade Association, say it would dismantle a highly successful system that generated $241 million in tax revenue last year and was twice approved by Missouri voters. As Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey cracks down on unlicensed hemp THC sales, this ballot effort could mark a dramatic turning point. The outcome of this campaign may determine whether Missouri pioneers a first-in-the-nation approach to cannabis regulation or retreats from a model seen as one of the most successful in the country.
The cannabis world is changing fast, and the State of Cannabis Weekly News Digest is your anchor in the storm. Every week, we break down the top national stories in under 15 to 20 minutes, helping growers, patients, retailers, and reformers make sense of the shifting landscape. If we've helped you make better decisions, take a moment to like, follow, review, and share the podcast wherever you are consuming it with someone who needs to hear the truth. This industry is growing. Let's grow smarter, together.
New York this week took two big, seemingly contradictory steps in its fast-growing cannabis industry, championing social equity while confronting a serious quality control lapse. In a long-awaited move, New York launched its first startup grants for dispensary owners with past marijuana convictions. With funding of up to $30,000 per business, it is part of a $5 million effort to support entrepreneurs prioritized under the state's Conditional Adult Use Retail Dispensary Program. It's a key part of New York's promise to ensure that communities harmed by decades of prohibition aren't left behind in the legal cannabis boom. That boom is well underway. Licensed dispensaries have nearly tripled since last year, with sales already topping $1.5 billion. Regulators are also innovating to keep the momentum going, considering rules that could allow pop-up sales and even cannabis concessions inside movie theaters. Meanwhile, that progress hit a snag with a statewide recall. Regulators pulled 9 cannabis products from the market after discovering they were contaminated with unapproved pesticides, slipping past a testing lab that since lost its credibility. Though no health effects have been reported, officials urged consumers to return the products and are now spotlighting lab oversight as a top priority. A list of the affected products can be found on the website of the New York State Office of Cannabis Management.
In North Carolina, bipartisan momentum is building around a new bill that aims to bring long overdue regulation to the state's hemp-derived THC market. House Bill 328, initially passed in a limited form by the House, has been dramatically expanded by the Senate to address a wide range of concerns, including youth access, misleading marketing, and synthetic cannabinoids. The bill now prohibits the sale of products containing Delta-8 and Delta-9 THC to anyone under 21 and requires all retailers to hold a license. Products must carry accurate labeling, including THC content and no cartoon-like branding that could appeal to children. Alcohol law enforcement will oversee enforcement, with escalating fines and the possibility of license revocation for violators. Attorney General Jeff Jackson voiced strong support, citing incidents where children have mistaken THC-infused candies for regular sweets. He stressed the importance of quick action and said the Department of Justice is ready to support enforcement. If it passes, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians medical cannabis program will be the only way for patients to obtain medical cannabis and THC in general.
In Ohio, a scheduled vote on proposed changes to the state's marijuana law was unexpectedly canceled after House and Senate Republicans failed to reach an agreement. The legislation, Senate Bill 56, was designed to amend the adult-use cannabis law approved by voters in 2023. But last-minute demands from the Senate, including stricter penalties and changes to tax allocations, proved too controversial for the House. House Republicans, led by Speaker Matt Huffman and Representative Jamie Callender, pushed back against Senate proposals to divert cannabis tax revenue from local governments to the state's general fund, and to impose criminal penalties for non-commercial sharing of marijuana. They argued that such changes run counter to the will of the voters and penalize responsible cannabis users. Senate leaders, including President Rob McCauley and Senator Steve Huffman, claimed there had been a prior agreement, but also introduced 16 new changes just before the vote. The House, caught off guard, pulled the bill from the schedule. Now, with the legislature heading into recess, the fate of Ohio's marijuana policy reforms remains uncertain.
As Pennsylvania races toward its June 30th budget deadline, a major policy debate has resurfaced: whether to legalize adult-use marijuana. Governor Josh Shapiro has made cannabis legalization a core part of his plan to fund public schools, public transit, and close a projected $4.5 billion budget gap. But despite strong public backing, with 68% of Pennsylvanians saying they support legalization, Senate Republicans have ruled the proposal out of the budget discussions. Democrats in the House already passed a legalization bill that would use a state-run store model. But Senate leaders quickly rejected that approach, calling it unserious. Instead, some GOP lawmakers favor a more incremental route, creating a regulatory body first before opening the market. Meanwhile, cannabis reform advocates say continued delays are costing Pennsylvania dearly, as residents drive to nearby states like New Jersey and Maryland to buy legal cannabis, contributing tax revenue elsewhere. Even conservative voices within the GOP have called prohibition a failure and pointed to the economic opportunities from legal cannabis.
Rhode Island's growing hemp beverage market has just received a temporary reprieve. On June 16th, state lawmakers unanimously voted to replace a proposed ban on hemp-derived THC drinks with a request for a formal study. The resolution directs the Cannabis Control Commission to propose regulations by March of 2026 that address product safety, dosage, packaging, and licensing. Representative Scott Slater, who introduced the initial ban, said the unregulated market undermines Rhode Island's legal cannabis industry and puts public safety at risk. However, liquor store representatives argue they are already well-equipped to handle intoxicating products and want to keep selling the drinks. Meanwhile, separate legislation by Representative Jacqueline Baginski and Senator Robert Brito would allow drinks with up to 5 milligrams of Delta-9 THC to be sold at liquor stores and bars. These bills are still under review. As other states tighten rules around hemp-based intoxicants, Rhode Island is choosing a more measured path, giving regulators time to sort out the best approach.
The future of Texas's booming hemp industry hangs in the balance this weekend, as Governor Greg Abbott must decide whether to sign, veto, or ignore a controversial bill known as Senate Bill 3. Passed by both chambers of the legislature, SB 3 would effectively ban all consumable hemp products containing any form of THC, shutting down a market that has flourished since hemp's legalization in 2019. The bill limits legal hemp products to only CBD and CBG and includes sweeping new rules for licensing, labeling, and distribution. Retailers and manufacturers would face fees as high as $20,000 and criminal penalties for noncompliance. It also prohibits products meant for smoking and any branding that appeals to children. The law, if enacted, will take effect September 1st, with a compliance deadline of January 2026. Governor Abbott, who hasn't signaled a clear position, acknowledged that both supporters and critics of the bill raise valid points. On one side are Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and conservative lawmakers who say the legislation is needed to regulate what they call dangerous THC-infused products. On the other are veterans groups, farmers, and hemp business owners who warn the ban will destroy small businesses and eliminate therapeutic alternatives for veterans and patients. More than 100,000 Texans have petitioned Abbott to veto the bill. Meanwhile, polling shows the public largely supports regulated access to cannabis and hemp products, especially for medical use. Political analysts suggest Abbott may let the bill become law without signing it, in a move that avoids political backlash from both sides.
Thanks for tuning into State of Cannabis, your weekly cannabis news digest. If you found today's episode useful, follow us, give us a like, leave a review or a comment, and share the podcast with someone who needs to hear it. We'll be back next week with more cannabis news, broken down and bias-free.